Okay, so we've been learning this Gemara about direction, facing which direction, and what's inappropriate because Beis Hamikdash and the Shechina and the Shulchan Aruch deals with these issues in chapter 3 of the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Law, not the summarized Code of Law. That I'm not sure of the chapter, but the regular Code of Law. It's in chapter 3 of the Code of Law, and what we saw yesterday, we went through the Mishnah Brura a little, and we saw that the rule seems to follow some opinion that is only concerned about east or west. There doesn't seem to be much of a concern about facing north or south. East and west is a problem. And then we saw that when it comes to urinating, then there didn't seem to be any problem except one view, the Gra, and even him. Maybe he might agree because nowadays we have pants, we wear different clothing, but that was seemingly the conclusion from the Shulchan Aruch here. At least the Mechaber, the Rabbi Yosef Cairo, he writes in chapter 3, and he writes about it in paragraph 5. He says, if you're in an area, an open area, it doesn't have walls, then a person would want to face south or north, and but east and west is the problem. Now, the question that we had yesterday was that this seems to contradict the way we learned the Gemara, because the way we learned the Gemara, there seemed to be a difference between where you are. If you're in the land of Yehuda, then the issue would be north, east, and west. If you're in the land of the Galil, which is northern Israel, then the issue would be north and south. So it did seem to contradict the way we understood the Gemara. And the truth of the matter is, the Beis Yosef is bothered with this in the Shulchan, in his commentary on the Torah. Where is the codifiers getting these laws from, if not from our Gemara? And our Gemara does seem to differentiate between where you're standing. Now, another codifier, the Rambam, he brings in the laws of the Beis Hamikdash. Interestingly enough, he brings a similar idea. He says, even though the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed, a person is obligated to have fear for it, the same way he would have fear when it was around. We have to be in awe of the Beis Hamikdash, similar to when it was standing. And therefore, one should only enter a region which he is permitted to enter. He should not sit in the area of the temple courtyard, nor should he act frivolously when standing before the place of the eastern gate, as implied, you shall observe my Sabbaths and you shall revere my sanctuary. And just as the observance of the Sabbath applies for eternity, so too the reverence for the temple must be eternal. Even though it is in ruin, it remains holy. When the temple is standing, a person may not act frivolously in the area from Mount Scopus, which is outside of Jerusalem. And inwards towards the city. So in other words, when the temple was standing, you had to be extra careful, not just in front of the eastern gate, but when the temple was standing, you had to be even more strict of not acting lightheaded in from the area of Mount Scopus. And this prohibition only applies when he can see the Beis Hamikdash and there is no fence between him and the temple. And then the Rambam says, and this is the main point that I want to bring from the Rambam, is again, it's chapter 7 of the laws of Beis HaBechira. Chapter 7, the laws of the Beis Hamikdash, the chosen house, Beis HaBechira. And it's in paragraph 9. He says, at all times, which means even in the time when the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed, a person may not defecate or sleep with his body positioned between east and west. It is superfluous to state that one should not place a toilet between east and west in any place throughout the world, for the temple is in the west. Therefore, one should not defecate to the west, nor to the east, for it is opposite the west. Rather, we should always defecate and sleep with our body from the north to the south. Whoever urinates from Mount Scopus inward to the city should not sit facing the temple. Rather, he should position himself to the north or to the south, or have the temple at his side. So this statement from the Rambam, again, seems to not fit so smoothly with our Gemara, because the Rambam is emphasizing that the direction that's a problem is always an issue when it's east and west, but never a problem when it's north and south. That's what it seems like from the Rambam. Again, in Shulchan Aruch, it seems to follow the same thing. So I mentioned to you yesterday, because they must be learning differently than we learned. We learned Rashi's explanation, and they're obviously following a different view. So it turns out that that's correct. They are following a different view. And the way they're learning our Gemara is that Rebbe Akiva in our Gemara is basically saying that the east and west is the issue, and it's not because you're actually facing Yerushalayim, but it's because the Shekhinah is in Ma'ariv. The divine presence is always in the west. Now, I mentioned to you yesterday, according to Kabbalistic writings, the Shekhinah is in the west. You see it from the fact that the sun, every day at sunset, it bows down to the west. That all of the heavenly structures are bowing down to Hashem, and that's supposed to make an impact on us humans. Now, that's a Kabbalistic insight. The main simple understanding of the Shekhinahs in the west is, if you take a look at the Beis Hamikdash, where was the Holy of Holies? The Holy of Holies is in the west, because the entrance of the Beis Hamikdash was at the east. And after you would enter the Beis Hamikdash, you would go into the Azara, the courtyard, and then you would go further into the Holies, and then the Holy of Holies. And that would be where the Ark is, in the Holy of Holies, and that would be in the west side, the west side of the Beis Hamikdash. So again, if the entrance was in the east, the west was the Ark. So the idea is that the Shekhinah is in the west, and that concept that the Shekhinah is in the west, again, we're not facing the Beis Hamikdash now. We're dealing with the fact that the Shekhinah, we always think of the Shekhinah being in the west, and being that the Shekhinah is in the west,
any diabetic medication, including insulin.
The east faces the west, and therefore between east and west is never appropriate to do anything that would be degrading, like a person relieving themselves, and therefore the Shulchan Aruch mentions this idea of mentions this law, I should say, of not defecating in that direction. Now, so we have the Rambam here who says this, and we have the Shulchan Aruch. Now, the Shulchan Aruch did clarify that it's only if it's in a place that's megula, that's revealed, there's no walls around. So that is um, an exception. In other words, that's why it really doesn't apply to us too much. Where would it apply to someone? Maybe if they were in the hiking and they were, out in the, some area where no one's around and they don't have any houses, no bathrooms, so it could apply. But it's not applicable in the regular residential areas, or regular built-up areas, I should say, that obviously this wouldn't apply. Now, if there are walls, so a person would expose themselves next to the wall, then it's not a problem. So either if the wall is on the east or on the west, whatever it is, you're exposing yourself next to the wall, so it wouldn't be an issue. Now,
Rabbi.
Yes.
Just to clarify, so if the Shekhinah is in the west and we're facing east towards the Beis Hamikdash, it seems like we're davening with our back to the Shekhinah instead of davening towards the Shekhinah.
So it's a little confusing, the east and the west. Somehow both directions, east and west, seem to have some element of Shekhinah connected to them. The west is called the Shekhinah. The east is called facing the Shekhinah. So the east side faces somehow it's considered facing the Shekhinah. But so I guess it's not considered a degrading, just facing in that direction. And on the contrary, our excuse is we're facing Yerushalayim. So it is interesting. The question you could ask is, why, when it comes to davening, do we concentrate on facing Yerushalayim? And when it comes to doing something degrading, we would concentrate on the fact that west is the holiness. Why don't we think there also the main point is the location of the Beis Hamikdash? In other words, for some reason, we don't think of the location of the Beis Hamikdash when it comes to degrading. We only think of the location of the Beis Hamikdash when it comes to tefillos. So that is interesting how that works. That, in other words, the Shekhinah is in the west, but that we generally just say that's applicable to not defecating in that direction. But when it comes to our davening, why is it that we concentrate on the actual Beis Hamikdash? Which direction is the Beis Hamikdash in? And we don't think about the world. So that's an interesting point. Why would that be? On a very simple level, the tefillah somehow travel into the Beis Hamikdash. So it's not just this concept of the West, but they're actually going to somewhere. So there's an actual, not physical because it's prayers, but there is a travel that's taking place for our prayers. So therefore, we are directing them towards the Beis Hamikdash, and that's where the tefillahs are going to be. V'zeh sha'ar hashamayim. That's the gate to heaven. When it comes to respect, somehow we look at the direction of west and east and say, you know what? That's these are the holy directions. We're not gonna face in these directions. Yes, Moshe.
Yes, Rabbi. How does the resurrection play a role in this also? I mean, that, when everybody is supposed to be resurrected, and they're, that even the people that are out of Eretz Yisrael, they're supposed to return to, to Israel. I mean, to Yerushalayim. I mean, isn't this also connected with that in some way too? I mean, not only the spiritual but the physical part of this,
Right. Well, everything is connected. In Torah, once you connect to Hashem, that's everything. You're connecting to. So for sure, everything is connected. But the idea that the travel that's going to take place when Mashiach comes and we have the resurrection, is a similar idea that they're actually going to head towards Jerusalem. They're not just going to go to the west. They're going to actually go physically underground to Jerusalem, and that's where the Tchias HaMesim is meant to be. So there's going to be a physical travel. So in any event, what we're seeing here is this idea that they don't seem to want to follow the simple understanding of the Gemara that Rashi gives. It seems that there is some other way of reading it, and that way of reading it is based on understanding Rabbi Akiva. We had that brisa with Rabbi Akiva where he says, Rabbi Akiva oiser b'chol makkah. He says Rabbi Akiva prohibits in all places, even outside of Israel. So the first opinion had mentioned in Yehuda is one direction, in Galil is another direction that's prohibited. Again, east or west in Yehuda, north and south is prohibited in Galil, and Rabbi Yossi is matir, and Rabbi Yehuda is matir. They both are lenient and they permit. And then Rabbi Akiva then says he's oiser b'chol makkah. Now the question is how to understand Rabbi Akiva. Is Rabbi Akiva saying he prohibits in all places similar to the first opinion, or is he just saying that he prohibits this concept of Mizrach and Ma'ariv everywhere? It doesn't matter where you are. You could read that he's prohibiting that being between Mizrach and Ma'ariv, between east and west, wherever you are, that's always prohibited. That's the prohibition. And if you learn it that way, if you learn that this is the prohibition, then what ends up happening is you have to learn the Gemara. The way you learn the Gemara is that the Gemara does ask, what's the difference between Rabbi Akiva and the first view? Now, according to this way, it's not so simple, because Rabbi Akiva in the first view, there is a big difference between the two. What's the question even? There's a huge difference. Rabbi Akiva says that it's all about east and west. No matter where you are, east and west is the problem. The first opinion depends where you are. In Yehuda is east and west, in Galil is north and south. So it does seem surprising that the Gemara asked this question. Rabbi Akiva is the Tanakama. So this is why Rashi, I'm just giving you the deeper reason why Rashi learned his way, is because the Gemara's question right afterwards fits very well with Rashi, because Rashi says that Rabbi Akiva and the Tanakama do seem to be saying exactly the same thing. And the only difference between Rabbi Akiva and the first opinion is what the Gemara concludes, that Chutz La'aretz, outside of Israel, is going to be a difference. In Israel, either the first view and Rabbi Akiva, they all agree. That's the way Rashi learned. Now, this other way of learning, I have to tell you, is really, most people don't even realize, but there is a Tosfos on page 61b. 61b, it's very easy to skip that Tosfos. I'll tell you why. It's not in its normal place. If you look on page 61b, there is a tiny Tosfos on the bottom. And this seems to be the source of the other opinion, the other way of learning the Gemara. And it's Rabbi Akiva Oiser B'chol Makom. That Tosfos on the bottom, it's four lines. He says he prohibits in all places, whether you're in Babylon, you're in America, Mizrach, Achayrav, Upanav, Lamairav, he prohibits in all places, east and west, and the conclusion is even in Chutz La'aretz, even outside of Israel. And the Yerushalmi explains that as long as there is no walls that are blocking. So what ends up from Tosfos is that you need to we need to understand Rabbi Akiva totally differently. Rabbi Akiva is not basing it on facing the Beis Hamikdash. He's basing it on the concept that the Shechina is in the west. That's that's basically how you have to how they're learning, and based on that, you have this this change in the Shulchan Aruch. It comes out that it's all about east and west. Now, take it a little further. I just want to mention to you that the Alter Rebbe rewrote his Shulchan Aruch. He started rewriting it, and he got to the first 4 chapters. So the first 4 chapters, we have 2 first 4 chapters in his Shulchan Aruch, and I'm going to read for you what he writes. Okay, found. I do also want to mention that the way I'm learning the Tosfos, it does seem to fit very smoothly, but there is another way of learning Tosfos. So it's not the only way of learning the Tosfos, but this seems to be the explanation, the way the halachic codifiers seem to have learned Tosfos, and they seem to fit this with the Yerushalmi, because there's a Gemara Yerushalmi that Tosfos quotes, and he says in Yerushalmi it explains. So it seems that the Yerushalmi also follows this view, the Jerusalem Talmud, that it's all about east and west. And Tosfos brings that the Yerushalmi adds this point about a wall. As long as if there's no wall, that's when it's an issue. But that this also fits with that story of Rabbah and Abaye switching around the stones. That Rabbah said, "I am careful. I follow Rabbi Akiva, and therefore, why did someone mess up my stones?" And that point is that he was careful east to west, and what he meant was not because he's east and west of Jerusalem, but because that's the rule. It's all about east and west. That's the and that's the conclusion. And he says, "I follow Rabbi Akiva," which is the proof that that's who the halacha follows. That we follow Rabbi Akiva because that's what Rabbah said. What do you who do you? Why did they switch it around? Everyone knows I follow Rabbi Akiva. I hold that Rabbi Akiva that view, and therefore that's the halacha follows Rabbi Akiva, and with the way it's understood, at least, is this way. Now, if we jump to the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, it's interesting. He wants to follow the Alter Rebbe wants to follow Rashi as well, at least in his second edited first 4 chapters of the Shulchan Aruch. He writes, let me just pull it up over here. So he writes here, if a person relieves himself in an open place, he should face south and his back to the north, or the opposite. In other words, north and south is fine, but not east and west because of the honor of the Shechina, because the Shechina is in the west. And the front of the Shechina, and this is for you, David, and the front of the Shechina, the Pnei HaShechina, is to the east. So the Shechina is in the west, but the front of the Shechina is in the east, and therefore it's called Kedem. The east is called Kedem, meaning the front, and the west is called the back, because the front of the Shechina is in the east. And that's the verse, Achar v'kedem tzartani. We had this verse in the Gemara. but I guess another translation of it is the Achar in Kedem Tzartani, where you have formed me, the front, the Achar, the back, which means the west, and the Kedem in the east, in the front. And Daraim, south, is called Taiman or Yamin. Why is south called the right? Because if the east is called the front, then the right side would be south. So that's why if Taiman means the south, or Yamin, the right. So if a person is somewhere diagonal, so what do you do if it's diagonal? Is that okay? So the Alter Rebbe says it depends if you're more to the let me read it in English here. It's a little easier. It is permissible to have one's back to the southwest, the northwest, the southeast, or the northeast. You're allowed to be diagonal as long as, provided that one's orientation is more north-south than east-west. So as long as it's more to this direction, more of the north-south direction than the east-west, if not, then it's forbidden. So if you're on a diagonal, it's could be okay as long as it's more north-south. Now, wherever possible, this is what I'm bringing, it is preferable to make a point of facing south with one's back to the north, and not the opposite, so that one will not be easing oneself in the direction of Yerushalayim and the site of the Beis Hamikdash. Guess what this is? This is the Alter Rebbe trying to follow Rashi's interpretation as well. So he's following the codifiers, the Rambam and the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch. He's following all of their views, but now he says, but it's also important, preferable to try to not face, your back should be facing Yerushalayim. Now, the Alter Rebbe lived in Russia, and that was, of course, north of Jerusalem. And therefore, if someone in Russia, many of the Jews were living in those areas, Poland and Russia. So in those areas, if you faced south, then your back, if you face south, that would be facing Yerushalayim. If you faced north, then your back would be exposed to Yerushalayim. So what does he say? That it's, if possible, it's better to face south, so one's back would be to the north and not towards Yerushalayim, and not the opposite, so one will not be easing oneself in the direction of Yerushalayim, the site of the Beis Hamikdash. So this means that he's following Rashi's view as well, trying to fulfill all the views. This applies in most of these countries that are located more to the north of Jerusalem than to the west, and even more so in those countries which are located directly to the north of Jerusalem. So this is applicable when you live in countries that are north of Jerusalem, or more north than west. And then he mentions that this above applies if it's in an open place, and therefore you don't have to worry if you're in a building at all to build, and even just the bathroom wall itself is enough. But then he says, but some say that a wall doesn't help, and if it's possible not to build a bathroom in that direction, the east and west directions, but rather you should face, rather the bathroom should be to the north. What does that mean? Not facing the bathroom, but the toilet would be in the north, which means you would be facing south and your back would be to the north, at least in those countries. Again, we live a different area than the Alter Rebbe and I guess the majority of the Jewish people at that time. But the point is that we see how the Alter Rebbe brings like these extra two chumras, these extra two stringencies of, I was just thinking about it, that the shul that they built, the Lubavitch shul they built here in North Miami Beach, I think the rabbi tried to fulfill this view. I think if you think, I was just thinking that the bathroom is actually built in that way, that it's not facing, it's facing east. Is it facing north south and not east west? Yeah. Anyway, it's typical the rabbi here to like catch on to these like small details. So anyway, yes.
The bathrooms in Young Israel are
All directions.
south.
North south. North south. So that same thing. North south is good. The east west is the problem. Okay. So I guess they also had tried to follow this strict view. I don't know that it's brought. The truth is, I should have checked the Shulchan Aruch better and made sure that I'm not.
I think also in Shari Tefillah the same thing.
Okay, and then we did mention a number of months ago about the law about sleeping and which direction one sleeps, and so I'm not going to get into it now. But the conclusion is that it's interesting that the Zohar says that east and west is fine, even if a person is with their wife, and so it doesn't seem to, even though Shulchan Aruch mentions the same thing about the sleeping would also be a problem east-west, but because I guess the Zohar says the opposite, so therefore people don't seem to be careful with the direction that they sleep. Even though the Rambam seems to say it doesn't matter even if a person's with their wife or not with their wife. Either way, the Rambam seems to mention where the place I just quoted, he puts it together in the same category as a person relieving oneself. But in any event, that touches upon the Gemara, the understanding of the Gemara that we're learning. The other thing that I did want to mention is then the Piskei Teshuvos, that he mentions a few things, because we were learning the Shulchan Aruch yesterday, and I mentioned to you that because they wore different types of clothing in those days, they didn't have pants, and so not everything is exactly the same. The same rules. So he says here in the Piskei Teshuvos, this is like a later authority that he's alive today. He summarized a lot of the latest halachic authorities, and he writes, regarding all of these laws, it's important to know that in those days, the bathrooms were not like the same bathrooms that we have, and it was more like a hole and in the ground, and the way they would sit, stand, it was different. They would like crouch, and they didn't have walls, and the type of clothing they wore in those days was not like the pants that we wear. It was more long. And they had the long socks that they would have, or slippers. And in our days, it's different. And there's doors, there's walls, there's locks, the clothing is different. And therefore, some of the halachas don't exactly. Some things we have to be more strict, and some things we can be more lenient. Gives an example that if a person could be more modest nowadays, then that's appropriate. And a person, like for example, a person urinating, they don't have to open up their whole pants. They can, you don't need a full, you don't need 10 inches to, or even 5 inches. to expose oneself because we have a zipper. And on the other hand, he says, if a person's sitting down already, it's a little hard to expose oneself. And therefore, person would, drop their pants before they, like certain laws like aren't exact because of the setup. And so therefore there are some of the rules don't fit exactly the way it's written in the Shulchan Aruch. The main point is to be as modest as one can, and that's basically what he brings over here. Okay, now we're going to continue tomorrow.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I just want to backtrack a little bit about the demons that you were talking about in the bathhouses that one has to be cautious about. Now, are there a difference between shadim and demons? Because demons, from what I understand, these are like they have webbed feet and things like that. From what I heard, so they have to be living, living humans. I mean, actually, demons wouldn't they be? Demons they're considered human beings, but shadim are more like spiritual things. So, were they more concerned about shadim or were they concerned about demons? I was just thinking.
I don't know too much about it. It's a little above my pay grade, the demons, but there is a building that I can direct you to that I drive by all the time, and I believe there are demons there, and you could check it out if you have the guts to. You have to be very gutsy. It's right by the all the highways with the clover leaf, where all those highways go together. So there's a big building there that's like all the windows are smashed. And it hasn't been lived in years. And I would guess that you might hear like spooky noises there and witches and, demons and who knows what going on there. And that would be like what we're talking about in the olden days, where you had, and I believe that there must be, and this is maybe also above my pay grade, but maybe Dovin might know about this, that the Baal Shem Tov got rid of a lot of the demons that we don't really see too much about it. Again, I'm telling you, there's a building there that I would be nervous to go into, but I believe for the most part, the Baal Shem Tov somehow got rid of through prayer, through fasting, through I don't know how the Kabbalistic ways. The Baal Shem Tov got rid of most of these or all of these demons. David, do you have any? Can you shed some light on that?
That's exactly what I heard, that the Baal Shem Tov got rid of most of these demons. And it could have been through, combinations of different names of Hashem and yichudim, like unifications between Hashem and the Shekhinah. Anyway, the bottom line is most of the demons were destroyed by the Baal Shem Tov, but there are some still.
Right. I do remember seeing, yeah. I'm sorry.
I asked the Rosh Yeshiva in Hadar Torah, Rabbi Goldberg. I said it's talking about in the Gemara about that if you put down like a powder or something on the floor, you can see these little web feet in the morning sometimes. And why don't we see that now? And he said the same thing, that the Baal Shem Tov had destroyed most of these demons, and that's why they're not visible. They're not able to be, not visible, but they're not able to be perceived because most of them have been destroyed by the Baal Shem Tov.
So this is the thing. So again, a lot of these things, they were more applicable, 300 years ago. So in the last 300 years, it's been minimized very, very much. So I do remember seeing an ad in the newspaper that they wanted to sell a house for very expensive, and their claim was, this is a very spooky house. There are demons and who knows what inside. Try at your own risk. And they had, they tried to, charge a nice fee and claiming that it's like scary and spooky and good for a gutsy person and maybe worth more money than a typical house. But I guess it's just a way the real estate agent figured they could make extra money. But the demons we don't really see much around. But in the time of the Gemara, and we'll see here that, when they would go to the bathroom, it was very scary. to go outside, and you go into these outhouses that who knows, where there's some type of it was a scary thing. You'd hear noises and shouts and screeches and like almost like we would imagine from witches and things that we're not familiar with. But okay, so the Gemara here, we learned, we're on page 62a, and we learned that a person who is tsanua, who's modest, in the bathroom, he's nitzel, he's saved from three things. There was snakes and scorpions and demons, and by being modest, so the Gemara seemed to understand that in a more practical way, not a spiritual thing, but more in a practical way, that the snakes and scorpions, if he's quiet, so they're not going to bother him, and with regard to the demons, so there it becomes more of a spiritual thing, that they see him having tznius, they are merciful on him. And there is also an idea that the angels are protecting him. So as long as he's tznius, if he's not tznius, then the angels they don't protect him. They go away from him. So that would be a more spiritual idea. Now, some say that also the dreams, the dreams, his dreams, the demons will not bewilder him when he sleeps. So not only they don't wound him, but they don't scare him. Then the Gemara brought a story that there was a bathroom in Tiberias in Tveria, and when they would go with two people, even during the day, they would get hurt. And this was very surprising, because normally two people together, the mazik and the demons are afraid of, and normally by day, even one person they're afraid of. So here, by day, two people are two reasons why they shouldn't have had any effect on humans, and yet they did. And this was a place in Tveria, and it seems like it was there must have been some type of koyach hatuma there. There's some powerful impurity there that caused that place had these demons that had like extra strength, they had extra energy, and they would bother people. They were not afraid of anything. They were like the wild demons. And the Gemara then says that Rav Ami and Rav Asi, they would go alone individually, and they didn't get hurt. And according to one of the versions, it says even at night. And the rabbi said, "Aren't you afraid?" And they said, "We have a Kabbalah, we have a tradition that the tradition that we have is that sniusa ushtikusa, is to be modest and quiet. That if a person is modest and quiet, and this includes the prohibition, there is a prohibition for people people shouldn't speak in the bathroom." And so that's another point that we see here, is that at least for men, women, there's a concept that they do speak when they're in the bathroom to each other, because it would make people know that people are there, that these women are there, and they wouldn't enter. But for men, you're not supposed to speak in the bathroom. And then it says the Kabbalah of Yesuri, the tradition, what to do when sorus, when pain and suffering comes upon a person, is shtikusa umive rachame, is not to fight the suffering, but rather to accept it quietly and to ask Hashem for mercy that he should remove this suffering. Now, Abaye, so now we're up to the new Gemara. The new Gemara is, it's like smack in the middle of the page. Let's see, maybe about 35 lines from the top. Abaye, who was an orphan, Merabule Ime, his mother would, his mother, not his real mother, but his stepmother, would bring up she brought up a imra, a sheep, lemeil bahadei lebeis hakisei, that it would go with him to the bathroom. And the reason why it would go with him into the bathroom is that he wouldn't be alone. The Gemara asks, why didn't she bring up a goat for this purpose? Why did she use a sheep? And for some reason, it seems that maybe a goat is easier to go with. I don't know. And the Gemara answers that the sa'ir b'sa'ir mechalaf, that the goat is exchangeable for a demon, a shindalit, a demon of the bathroom is somehow similar to a sa'ir, and somehow it wouldn't have helped. In other words, it would have been a problem if that shindalit, if he brought a goat with him into the bathroom, it would have possibly taken on this element of the demon. And because the demon of the bathroom is similar to a goat, or it's formed like a goat, so maybe he'll end up being with that demon instead of the goat that his mother gave him. Somehow it'll switch. He'll mistakenly well, the different ways of explaining it. One way is that the goat will think that Abaye is alone. It won't realize that there's actually something with him, because it'll think that it is the other goat is really just himself, is a demon, and therefore he'll think that Abaye is alone. That's one way of understanding it. Another way of understanding it is that people will think that Abaye is connected to a demon. So the Gemara says that his mother gave him a sheep, not a goat, because somehow the goat is the demon of the bathroom. Rava, I don't know, does the art school have another interpretation? Anyone there have like an interpretation, or the Steinsaltz? Anyone?
Steinsaltz, yeah. It says the goat could be interchanged with a goat demon. There's a demon that looks like a goat,
Right.
And since
Okay.
both the demon and the goat are both called by the name Sa'ir, they were afraid to bring a goat to a place frequented by demons because they were afraid that they would make a change, an interchange between the goat and the goat demon. And they're
And
both
what does that
called by,
mean
well, they're both
practically?
called, since they're both called by the same name, they were afraid that if they brought a goat into the place where there's demons, the demons might try to pull a switch and change the goat into a goat demon, a demon that looks like a goat.
Oh, so they might take it over. They might take
right.
over the goat and turn it into a demon.
Switch it. It says it's interchange. But because,
So
and that's possible because they're both called by the same name, Sawyer.
right. Okay. So that sounds like a slightly different interpretation than I gave. Well, one of them is that people will think that he's attaching himself to this demon, or the fact that that the demon will confuse the fact that he's with another goat as if that's another entity. He won't know that. He won't realize that. But okay, I guess your shot I guess fits a little better with the wording. The sa'ir b'sa'ir machalef, it's going to switch. It might end up turning into the goat, and then he's going to end up going with the demon. Or it could be that he might take the demon home. Maybe not that the demon will switch into his goat, but maybe he will confuse the two, and he will end up taking the wrong one. That could be a fourth explanation. Anyway, bottom line is she didn't give him a goat; she gave him a sheep.
And here in Art Scroll, it says a goat would be interchanged with a goat-like demon and would not afford protection.
Protection. So that's one of the explanations I gave.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Rava Makami to have a Resha. Rava, before he was a Rosh Hashiva, Mekarkashalei Bas Rav Chizda, the daughter of Rav Chizda, who was his wife, she would make a bell. Mekarkashalei, she would ring a bell. Amaguza belakana.
In Art Scroll, it says would rattle a walnut in a copper receptacle for him.
A walnut in a there's a term for the bell part and the other thing, but whatever it is. So the walnut. Okay, thank you. A walnut in the copper
receptacle, what container, whatever
you call it. There must be a name for that. But so she would ring this bell, and this way it would sort of like scare the mazikin. Now the question really is, this seems to contradict the clapper. Oh, thank you. There's the clapper. The clapper is the piece that that hangs, that bangs, right?
Right.
That's
that hits against the sides of the container.
Right. Okay, fine. That's thank you, Ezra. So she gave him this bell. She would ring this bell, and that would get the mazikin to go out. Now the problem is, this seems to contradict what we said earlier, that noise is the opposite of what you want in a bathroom. It seems like quiet is to get away the demons, or to be safe. So it does seem interesting that like, which one is it? I'm wondering if maybe before you enter, you could kick out the demons with noise. Once you enter, maybe that's the explanation why it's not a problem. that because if she would kick them out before, then they wouldn't. Then they would leave. If he would enter, then making noise bothers them, and he's right there. They're going to bother him. Anyway, the Gemara doesn't really mention this issue. It just mentions what she used to do. Basar de Malach. Now, after Rava became a Rosh Hashiva, and when you become a Rosh Hashiva, you become a certain level where the mazikin, the demons, are jealous of him. So now she has to find a better avenue, better method to get rid of the demons, because now they're more rough. They're going to be they're more they desire him more. So Abdalay Kavsa, she made a window, Umanchale Yada Areshe, and she would put her hand on his head, and this way somehow it would protect him when he was relieving himself. Amar Ula said, Achore Hageder, if a person is amongst other people and they need to relieve themselves, so Achore Hageder Nifne Miyad, opposite on the back of a wall, behind a wall, a person would be allowed to relieve himself, even though there are people not too far away. But since there's a wall and their friends can't see him, so he would be permissible. He doesn't have to run far out into the field. He could stay right there because he's behind the wall. There's a wall blocking. He can relieve himself immediately. Vabika, if he's in a valley and it doesn't have a place to hide, so kolzman shemasatesh ve'ein chaveroi shemea. He should go away from his group of people to the extent, to the location that's, if he would pass gas, no one will hear him. And doesn't have to go further away than that. But as long as he's in an area far away enough, then that would be the extent that he should be, that would be considered sneus. Isi bar noson masni hachi. Isi bar noson has brings a different view. He learned this way. Achore hageder, after behind the wall, calls man, as long as shemasatesh ve'in chavera shemea, as long as if he would pass gas and his friend wouldn't hear him, that's permissible behind a wall. Uvabika, in a valley where there's no wall, so calls man shein chavera royehu, he would have to go further away, as long that to a place where no one can even see him. So the understanding is that Ra'isi Bar Nasan is more strict than Ula. In other words, Ula seemed to be a more lenient view, and Isi Bar Nasan was a more strict view. Okay, and I guess my time is up, so we'll have to stop.